Toronto has finally seen some news that not everybody is too excited about. The City of Toronto has proposed a 10.5% property tax increase. We are going to get into the article here on stories.com. And before we do, if you like the content that I put out there, if you like me covering the Greater Toronto Area real estate news, first-time buyer advice, and anybody who's looking to go from their first home to their second property, I'd love it if you followed the channel, shared it with somebody else, and if you have any questions, feel free to message me in the comment section down below, and I'd be happy to help you out. So let's get into the article here. So the Toronto budget proposes a 10.5% property tax hike for residential properties. Budget Chief Shelley Carroll said that the property tax rate could end up being quite a bit higher than 10.5% if the federal government is unable to provide $250 million in funding for refugee claimants utilizing the city's shelter system. Toronto residents could see a hefty 10.5% tax hike as a result of the year's budget deliberations, which will take place over the next coming weeks. City Councillor Shelley Carroll, who is also the budget chief for the city, confirmed the proposed increase on Wednesday morning. Prior to today, Carroll had hinted at the increase, telling reporters earlier in the week that it would be substantial. Keep in mind here, property tax in Toronto is one of the lowest across all of the Greater Toronto Area and across all of Ontario. So we're seeing a 10.5% potential increase here that's going to happen. It's still going to leave Toronto with some of the lowest property tax out there. Although some people buy in Toronto because of the lower property tax, most people buy in Toronto because that is where they want to particularly live. So this increase, although 10% does sound like a big number, it is not going to bring them to the same levels of property tax that a lot of other cities. Unfortunately, this property tax hike was doomed from the beginning. It had to happen. Toronto has one of the lowest property taxes, and this was something that anybody could have predicted. So let's get into the article a little bit more and see what else they have to say. So the proposed hike is higher than the city has seen in several years. For some context, former Mayor John Tory has raised the property tax rate by just 2.9% in 2022 and by 5.5% in 2023. Though last year's hike was the highest since the city's amalgamation, it is still below Toronto's 6.6% rate of inflation. Carroll says that the city is taking a more aggressive stance on property tax because of Toronto's enormous operating shortfall, which is estimated at close to $1.8 billion and is being exacerbated by growing demand for refugee claimant support and shelter spaces, as well as decreased transit revenues. In light of these pressures, the city staff have been prepared for a property tax increase of 9% for residential properties, which will allow for better alignment with the Greater Toronto and Hamilton area municipalities, according to a press release from the city. Although 10% sounds big, John Tory did have a 5+% increase in 2023, so this is not new. The last couple of years we have seen some increases. 10% will be the biggest in some time, which is why we are seeing this article here. But Toronto, if you've been there recently, the city does need some help. There's a lot of roads that need some work. Gardiner is constantly falling apart. So this is something that is long overdue and necessary. And if you own a home in Toronto, although paying an extra, what it's going to turn out to be is a few $100s a year, it's really going to make the city a better place and at least have more funding available to do some of these repairs that are necessary. Now, the amount of 10.5 is going to roughly be $321 annually for the average assessed home in Toronto. So this is going to be about $26.75 per month. On top of the 9%, a 1.5% increase for the city building levy has been proposed. The release also says which would bring the overall property tax to 10.5%, as we've been discussing. In speaking to reporters on Wednesday morning, Carroll said that the property tax rate is not set in stone, and it could actually end up being quite a bit higher than the 10.5% if the federal government is unable to provide $250 million in funding for refugee claimants utilizing the city's shelter system. Without that funding, Carroll says the city would be forced to impose a federal impacts levy of 6%, which would put the property tax increase at 16%. City Council is set to vote on the final budget package on February 14th. So on Valentine's Day, we are either going to get a great news story where the property tax is only going to be 10.5%, or we are going to see that additional 6% levy added to get us to that 16.5%. Now, if you own a property in Toronto, you have hopefully been preparing yourself for this increase for some time. If you are new to home ownership, or if you've been thinking of purchasing a home in Toronto, This is something that you should have been prepared for if you are dealing with an agent. They would have told you that Toronto has some of the lowest property tax, but they also would have told you that this has been speculated for quite some time that the property taxes are going to increase because the city needs the extra funding. Now, the City of Toronto, as you may or may not know, when you're purchasing a property there, you do have to pay twice as much in terms of the land transfer tax. You have to pay the 2 portions instead of just the 1 portion that you have to pay outside of the GTA. So the provincial and federal instead of just the provincial land transfer tax. So that they've been using to kind of subsidize the taxes being so low for some time. But unfortunately, with properties not moving, houses not selling as frequently, we've seen a lot of changes to not only the land transfer tax, and we haven't seen any changes to the property tax. And every other city around the GTA, I know where I live in Waterloo myself, we've seen increases in the last 3 years of $300 or $400 over the course of the year. And we already have higher property taxes. So when we're talking about Toronto and them not seeing very big increases, this is something that is no shock at all. If you're a Toronto resident, I know it's something that bothers you. Let me know in the comment section down below. Did you expect this to come? Did you think the property taxes were going to be low forever and that the city would just deteriorate without the funding? Or was this something you prepared yourself for? Thanks so much for watching this video. I will see you in the next video. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye for now.